Hello, I'm Oliver Pickard and welcome to beautiful Limousin, France. Today we're going to be working on my parents' 1974 Dyane. Now we're going to be working on the carburetor because it's developed a bit of a problem. It doesn't like to tick over, and as you can see it's quite a mucky old girl. But the problem is she doesn't really like to idle, she doesn't like to tick over, but on part or full throttle she's perfectly fine. So what we're going to do, we're going to take her off, we're going to strip her down, and we're going to clean her up, and then we're going to use a rebuild kit to service the carburetor and see if that solves the problem. A carburetor doesn't need to be anywhere near as daunting as you might think, but there are some little tricks and tips that I can give you to make your life much easier. The first of which is get a little tub with a lid that locks. This was from some Christmas lights, and when you take any screws or anything, any hardware off the carburetor, put it in the box and keep the box on the floor. The reason for keeping it on the floor is if I keep it up here and then I stand up and I bash my head on the bonnet, I'll knock the box into the guts of the engine, and then all my screws disappear and I have to spend the rest of the day trying to find them all. Whereas if it's on the floor, it can't fall off the floor. The next one is use the correct size screwdriver. So even though it's a flathead screwdriver, you want a flathead screwdriver that perfectly fits each and every screw. So if you need multiple screwdrivers, use multiple screwdrivers. Nothing's worse than trying to take apart a carburetor with really knackered screws. And the third thing is get yourself a little, or make yourself a little bung for the fuel pipe. The reason for using a bung is many people use a bolt, and a bolt's no good because the threads on the bolt damage the inside of the fuel line, and so your fuel line cracks way before it would have. So a little bung, a box, and the correct size tools. It's very simple, and then just take your time. Oh, and above all, don't remove your air filter until you've done everything else, and then that way you can't drop anything in your engine. Simple. Now, when you come to remove your fuel hose, if it doesn't just slide beautifully off, don't rive at it or pull it or twist it. The reason is there's a piece of tubing inside here. So carefully take your flathead screwdriver, don't press down hard, and just give her a little wiggle. And sometimes all it takes is a little wiggle just to get that stiction off. And don't rive at it, be very gentle. And there we go. Hold it up high, pop your bung in, nice and tight, and we're good. This is a perfect time to check that your fuel hose is ethanol safe. If you don't have ethanol safe fuel line, I advise that you replace your fuel line with ethanol safe fuel line, because all fuel has ethanol in it now, and ethanol bad for old fuel line anyway. Loosen the choke cable, which is very fiddly. There's the throttle rod, but we're going to wait to do the throttle rod, I think, because my fat hands can't get in to do it. These little clips are a nightmare. Ah, it's off. I've got it. Now, instead of putting this bolt in my box, I'm actually going to just tighten it up again. Anytime that you can put a bolt back where it lives is better. So in order to remove the last nut from the carburetor, I'm going to adjust the alternator, and I'm also going to remove the engine breather because you just can't get a spanner onto it. So I'm going to use this lovely 3/8 drive ratchet. And unlike Jolene, a lot of the bolts on the Dyane are actually 11mm, not 12. So that's new to me. I'm used to going to working on my car and only taking one spanner. The reason why I've waited till this point to do this is simply that I don't want to drop anything in the engine. So if you wait until right at the end when you have to undo this bolt and then you start undoing the other stuff, there's a lot less chance that you're going to drop something in something. There we go. And out she comes. Now take my rag, put half of it in there. So now I've brought the carburetor into the workshop and I've ordered a rebuild kit. Now it's a full rebuild kit is this, with a new needle valve, a new pump diaphragm, the whole shebang. You have to be very careful with these 2CV6 carbs because there are two separate different shaped gaskets. But if you order a kit, you get both of them. And if you're going to go to the effort of taking your carb off and cleaning it up, you might as well rebuild it at the same time because these kits are about €25. So it's not expensive, and like I say, it comes with everything you need. Except there is one other tool I'm going to need, because to clean this carburetor, I'm actually going to use this. This is my new toy, a sonic cleaner. I've wanted an ultrasonic cleaner for a really, really long time, ever since they first came out and they were super expensive. Now, they're not super expensive anymore, and I've got a big one. You can get teeny tiny ones, but to be honest, a teeny tiny one takes up as much space on a shelf as a big one, so you might as well get a big one. And I get to play with this for the first time today. Sonic cleaners, if you don't know, don't use solvents and things to clean metals. They use a bit of degreaser and sound. And they were originally developed by a marine archaeologist to clean barnacles and stuff off antiquities without damaging them. But they've since found a home in many garages and engineering shops and stuff like that, as well as jewellers, because they're brilliant and they're fantastic at cleaning things to a level which a toothbrush, it just isn't going to get to. So that's what we're going to use, but first we have to take this old girl apart. Really important when removing a casing off something like this to just go around and crack every single screw loose first. Don't just start with one screw and remove it completely. And the reason for that is because it's a machined surface and you have a gasket underneath, you want to make sure that you loosen it perfectly all the way around at the same time, because the last thing that you want to do is deform in any way that casing. On these Solex carburetors, the gasket is on the top. Not on all Solex carburetors, but on these specifically. And these are your floats, and that is your needle valve. And on Solex carburetors, there. And on many Solex carburetors, the needle valves have a tendency to stick, which causes over-fueling at low speed. So if you've got any sort of Solex powered car, be it a Renault, be it a Lotus Europa or a 2CV, and you're coming up to a stoplight and it won't idle and it's really horrible and it starts backfiring when you accelerate again, it's this little guy sticking. And sometimes you can just take them out and clean them and put them back in again, but sometimes they're just too worn. But we have a full kit, so we're going to replace everything. And just check out the sand that's inside this carb. And this carb has always had an air filter on it. But this is why you should never ever run any sort of engine, whether it be turbo or normally aspirated or whatever, without an air filter and a fuel filter. Good quality air filters and fuel filters are worth the money. Because just check that out. Because the camera doesn't pick it up well, I'm just going to dump the carb out onto some paper and just show you how filthy it actually is. Check this out. look at all of that, and it's sand. I can get another piece. Now just think that this goes into your engine. That black horrible grit goes into your engine, and because the cylinder walls of your engine have a fine oil coating, that grit sticks. And when your piston goes up and down, it's like sandpaper. And this is why every time I see a car that doesn't have an air filter, I flinch inside. This is definitely a lesson that a lot of people need to learn. Every time you see a car with twin or triple Webers or individual throttle bodies with no air filter, this is what you are doing to your engine. You are literally taking hundreds or even thousands of miles off that engine's life by running it without a filter. And a racetrack is even worse because they tend to be very gritty and very brake dusty. And when you are following a car into a corner and they slam on their brakes and all that dust gets kicked up, it'll get sucked straight into the cylinders of your engine. Just think how dirty your wheels get. Well, your engine's literally sucking that up. It's awful. But we're going to clean her all out and make her all pretty again. It's a good job the Sonic Cleaner was invented by a marine archaeologist, because this carburetor looks like it was in the hole at the bottom of the sea. But it's alright because we have a full rebuild kit. This is why it's not worth doing half a job. If you're going to do it, do the full thing. Next job is to remove the floats, and then we get onto the needle valve, and it's great fun, is this, isn't it? Fiddly, but great. Yay! Make sure that when you remove a needle valve, you always use a full hex socket and not a multi-hex. They need supporting all the way around, and that way you don't damage it when it goes on and you don't damage it when it comes off. Because if you damage it when it goes on, the next time you need to remove it, it'll be difficult because it'll be all chewed up. There we go. That is a needle valve. Now, I did an Instagram thing a while ago where I removed my needle valve from Jolene, because as I mentioned earlier, in Solex carburetors this is a massively common problem, and even in my tiny little cherry glass sized carb that's on Jolene, the needle valve stuck, and it's a really common thing with ethanol as well. And modern fuel, when you leave any Solex for any length of time, they have a tendency to gum up their needle valve. They don't always need replacing, but I actually helped a guy out on Facebook about 2 months ago, and he said, "Oh, my Lotus isn't running right," and then I said to him, "It's your needle valve," and he said to me, no, it's not my needle valve. I checked it, cleaned it out, rebuilt my carb 3 months ago. It's not my needle valve. I said, if that car's been sitting, it's your needle valve. Lo and behold, needle valve. It's the most common problem for Solex carb, so it's worth looking out for. So we've made the executive decision that we're not going to strip this carb down any further. We're actually going to clean it as it is, and the reason is, by stripping it down further, there's a risk of introducing dirt into places where currently there isn't dirt, things like threads and stuff like that, we don't want to make a bigger problem for ourselves than it already is. So we're actually going to clean this carb as it is, and then we're going to strip it down further after that, because I'd like to take apart a clean thing rather than a dirty thing. Now in here, in our deep carb cleaner, is water and dish soap, basically washing up liquid. And it's warm. And it's warm because this particular Sonic Cleaner actually warms its own water, and the instructions say that it's best between 40 and 60 degrees. So we've put it on 50. And we're going to put the carb in, turn it on, and see how it does. This is the first test. I'm really excited about this. Put it in the basket. That is just Solex sized. and the top. And that is why it's worth buying the bigger one. And just pop it in. In the end, we bathed the carb last night 3 times, just because we could, and I'm absolutely amazed. The casting looks like a brand new one nearly. It's amazing. It didn't get off some of the carbon black inside the carb, but everything else, like in the bottom of the float bowls and everything, all the hard to reach places, it's beautifully clean. So I'm really happy with that. I'm calling that a success. Here's the other half, and it's lovely and clean, and that's simply just fairy liquid and water, well, washing up detergent and water. So yeah, really happy with that. So this morning what I'm going to do is take the jets out. Now the jets in a carb, remember, using the correct size screwdriver for the slot in the jet. Now, what the jets do is they govern the amount of fuel that goes into that part of the carburetor. And there we go. That's what a jet looks like. It's a little piece of brass with a teeny tiny hole. I'm just going to hold it up to the light and check there's no blockages, which there isn't. Nothing in there. You mustn't poke welding rods and stuff through jets, and do one at a time. Take it out, clean it, check it, put it back in again. Don't take them all out and then put them all back in again, because it's easy to get them confused. Now, I'm not going to go into how carburetors work and stuff in this video. I might make that video in the future if anybody's interested, but I find a lot of the people who watch these videos, you're all quite clever and quite clued in and know how things work and stuff anyway. You all seem very well educated. Sometimes better than me. And so I'm not going to go into how it all works. You know there's a slow speed side and a high speed side and all of that. You know what a mechanical secondary is. So there's not much point in me going into it. But for those at home who don't know, because there's nothing wrong with, see the little tiny governor hole? There you go. For those who don't know at home, this is a Venturi, which is just basically a little cone. And as air rushes past, it pulls fuel in. It works the exact same way as a paint gun. You know, you load the paint in the bottom, and then when you pull the trigger, the air comes out and it sucks the paint out and sprays it on your car. Exact same way. And we have basically 2 carbs. We have a little one and a big one in this carburetor. And so when you open up the accelerator a little bit, it uses one, the little one. And when you open up the carburetor a lot, or the accelerator a lot, we have another jet here. Like I say, when you open up the accelerator a lot, and put your foot down, it opens up both and gives it loads of fuel. Which is very different to my little Jolene. In my 2CV, this one might be blocked. Yeah, we have a blocked jet. There we go. I think this is probably what was causing the issue, because it is blocked. But in my carburetor, in my AZA 2CV from 1963, it's a little tiny single body, just one of these, and it looks like a sherry glass. And because it only has one body, not 2, what happens is, at certain points in the accelerator, if you sit at a certain point in the throttle, so in Jolene it tends to be about 3/4 throttle, she tends to get a bit grumpy because she starts to overfuel, too much fuel and not enough air, because it's a compromise. Whereas this isn't a compromise, because you've got one for slow and one for fast. The problem with this sort of carburetor is when you're sat on the motorway, you can sit just enough so that both are open, but the second one's only open a little bit and then it uses loads more fuel. The carbs that came after this, which you'll find on a LNA or a Citroen Visa, is what's called a vacuum assisted secondary carburetor, which is where the actual suction of the engine opens the secondary and not your foot, which get better fuel economy. And some Dyane owners swap these out for the single older school carburetors, a bit like Jolene's but bigger, because you get better throttle response, but you do get worse fuel economy. Makes no difference really. Right, I need to unblock this jet. So while my blocked jet is cooking, I'm going to remove this air screw. Now the way to be able to remove an air screw and then put it back as it was is to screw it in, and as you're screwing it in, count how many turns it is. So this was 6.5 turns to be screwed all the way in, and then I'm going to unscrew it, and when I screw it back in again, I screw it in all the way, and then I screw it out 6.5 turns, and I know it goes back in exactly where it was. Does that make sense? Clear as mud.
Right, so we go half, 1, half, 2, half, 3, half, 4, half, 5, half, 6.5.
So it might still, even with the counting technique, it might still need a little bit of a fettle, because if you haven't owned the car from new and this is the first time you're cleaning your car, there's a good chance that someone did a little bit of a fettle on a dirty carb to make a dirty carb run properly that needed a rebuild. So there's a good chance you could put it all back in and it might not work perfectly and it might need a bit of a tweak. But this gets you somewhere close to how it was when you put it on the car. And if it was working when you put it on the car and you just decided to do maintenance and a rebuild anyway because you're a good car owner, then it will actually, it should get it back to as close as possible, spot on. But there are no guarantees, and sometimes it needs resetting up, but it gets you somewhere close. It's better than being anywhere and not knowing where your adjustment started and where it was before, or taking off a perfectly working carb and then putting on a carb that's been fully rebuilt and it not working. That feels like going backwards, doesn't it? So this at least gets you back to where you started, except with a clean carb. Fries are done. Clean. Light. If you wait to look through it before you blow it, because you've got bubble mixture in there basically, you'll have a little bubble inside, which makes it much easier to look through because the bubble will refract the light and allow you to see through, if that makes sense. Because it's a teeny tiny hole. It works like a cat's eye. So the one thing that didn't come with our rebuild kit is this little gauze fuel filter here. This is a secondary fuel filter that's basically the carb's fuel filter. And like I say, our rebuild kit didn't come with it. So what we've done is we've sonic cleaned it and then we've thoroughly cleaned it ourselves. What we noticed is there was a little bit of fluff inside the actual screw. But this is clean, so it can go back in there. It's really important that you make sure you don't over tighten things, especially on an old carb, because over time aluminium actually age hardens, which means the threads become harder and therefore more brittle and more likely to break. So it's really easy to strip old aluminium, especially when your bolt is made of a harder material. So it's time to open up our new rebuild kit, and what I've done, I've put a piece of kitchen roll here, and we're going to put all the stuff that we're not using up above and all of our nice new stuff down below. So we're going to remove our old pump gasket like this, and you can see how it was actually stressed
and could have broken.
So while my little pump cooks before I put this in, I'm going to just show you the difference between these two gaskets. This is why I said it's worth buying a full rebuild kit. So you'll notice these two gaskets at first look identical, but when you keep looking, this rectangle here is a circle here. Rectangle, roundy rectangle, circle. And this circle is actually in a different spot altogether. And you've got two holes here and one hole there. So it's really important you make sure that you get the right gasket for your carb, or order a rebuild kit and it comes with both. Or talk to one of your friends who has a 2CV who may have the other carb and they may have a spare gasket that they don't need. It's also worth remembering that because you took the engine breather off to get to this bolt, you'll also need an engine breather gasket. So if you haven't ordered one, now's the time to do that. Because you don't want to put anything back on with an old gasket. But you can see, like, this is your base gasket and this is the gasket that goes in between. But you don't want to never ever want to take anything apart in an engine and not put it back together with a new gasket. Because a new gasket is super cheap. But if it leaks, it means you end up having to do the job twice. So it's never worth not replacing the gasket. I'm really impressed with this Solex cleaner. I will say though, it's not so good at the carbon deposits. It gets it super clean, but you can see it doesn't remove the carbon deposits. Look, you can see the carbon deposits there? It's not so good with those. Everything else, like old fuel residue and stuff like that, especially with ethanol fuels, you get a lot of yellow residue. It's good at removing all of that, but carbon deposits it doesn't like, and it doesn't do, and obviously it doesn't scrub. I say this a lot about nice tools. A lot of them aren't necessarily better than just doing it yourself with a toothbrush and some fairy liquid, but they do it on their own, so they save you a bunch of time, and because time is money, they save you money. Although they do cost you money, so if it's worth saving the time, then it's worth spending the money. So what we're going to do is we've popped our spring in. Now just pop our little diaphragm in. Like that. And then we just place it down. Lovely. I know I've said it before on this channel quite a few times, but if you're not confident in doing something like this, if you've never done it before, while you take things apart, if you get your phone and you take a ton of photos, then you have loads of reference for when you go to put it back together, especially if it's going to be like a couple of days or something between taking it apart and putting it back together. It's really worth having a ton of reference photos. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put all 4 screws in, but I'm not going to tighten them up. I'm just going to gently put them down, and then once I've got all 4 of them in, then I'll tighten them up. Because what you don't want to do is, in this gasket here, there's a little bit of squish, and you don't want to bend the aluminium tabs. Obviously these are like tabs. You don't want to bend the aluminium of the casing down and then it not seal properly. And then that way, you know you're not risking bending the casing. Like that. Keep it all completely flat. And some stuff has an order. If you ever have a casing of anything, be it an engine or a carburetor or anything like that, and you look in the manual, if there's ever like a ton of bolts, in some cases you have, some cases, you have an order of an order in which you have to tighten things down really specifically because of the way that the case is designed. Just like the head on an engine. The head on an engine or the bottom on an engine, for instance, on a lot of engines that have a girdle for the crank, they have to be tightened in a very specific order as well. So it's always worth checking. If you have a manual, it's always easy to say, oh, I know what I'm doing, I don't need a manual, da-da-da-da-da. But those things are really important. And if it's 6 months since you've done something like that, I'd still check a manual, because I always assume that I know nothing. And then go from there. That is different. So our new needle valve is different to our old needle valve. This is the same style of needle valve I have in my little tiny 18 horse carburetor. Whereas this, I think, will probably be the original needle valve. There we go. Now, this often happens when you buy a rebuild kit. You'll often get a part that doesn't look like the original. And that may well be that there is actually a problem with this design of needle valve. And so Solex later on decided to change the design. And so you'll get the later needle valve that was more reliable. Or it could just be that because the kit wasn't actually made by Solex itself and was made by a third-party company, they went with what they could get. But often you may end up with actually a better component. Notice I'm not holding the socket at the end. The reason I'm not doing that is that's a really big lever, so you can put a deceptive amount of force into it, which could involve stripping it. So whenever it requires just being sensitive, if you hold it at the end, it's a lot harder to over tighten things because you have less leverage, so you can't physically put as much torque in. That's why a torque wrench has a really big long bar. So now I've had a look at our old gasket, and that has told me which one is the correct new gasket. The other thing is, by the way, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep this and label it with the year of the car and which car it is, so I don't get it confused with any other gaskets that we have. And that way, in the future, when I come to order a new gasket, I won't need to order the complete kit. I can just order one of these if I ever need to. On top of that, I've had a look at the spindles on this carb, and even though these carbs are known for their spindle wear, these spindles are like brand new, despite being like filthy before. It's actually not a very worn carb, it's just a very dirty carb. So that's really good news, and I'm not going to bother replacing all the spindle seals and all of that. I'm going to keep those in a little bag, and then in the future, if they ever do wear, I can replace them, and I have some in stock. And I'll then, because I've got a gasket, to have a rebuild kit, all I'll need to do is get a new gasket. So yeah, there's no point repairing stuff that isn't broken. So all I have to do now is pop it all back together. So unlike earlier Solex carbs, where the little needle valve jumps out and runs away every time you take the carb apart, these needle valves, to fix that, are super tight. So it's the opposite problem. So you have to make sure they slide in this case, and you have to make sure you put it in square, and you're very gentle, but it is a very tight fit. And so you just pop it into place. So unlike older 2CV carbs where there isn't a float measurement and you just have to finagle it until it works properly, on this we actually have a proper float measurement that we have to set the carb to, which is nice because it means you get your carb working the first time. And in order to measure it, you put your carb on the bench with your float on, and it's 18 millimeters to the set from here to the center. So just put our vernier on, and you'll see that that is pretty spot on, I think. It's slightly high. So we need to just adjust it down just slightly. And the way we adjust it is by just bending this. And so to lower it, just give it a little tweak. It doesn't need much. Being a lever. And then measure it again. That's pretty spot on, that. Ooh. Yep, spot on. I just popped my little screws in, and the and the last little linkage. And I found that I've been doing a comparison while I've been playing, I'll be honest, but I've been testing. I love testing stuff. It's one of my favourite things. I love doing reviews on this channel for the reason that I have loads of fun when I'm testing stuff. And I found one of the things that this machine is best at is it's fantastic at cleaning my nuts, bolts and screws. And it's like brand new. Like, they're absolutely brilliant. Look at that. Shiny things. So just the same as before, we're going to put all the screws in but not tighten them. Until we've got all of them in, and that means that we're not going to bend the top of the casting. I'm going to go around and now I'm going to slowly tighten them. I'm not going to tighten them completely, but I'm just going to firm them up before I nip them up. And I'm going to go around in opposites like this. And there we have it, a newly serviced carburetor. And because we counted our rotations of our screws on the way in and stuff, it should just go back up. Now, and pop our new carb, well, old carb, that's all shiny and like brand new, back in place. Now, I'm just going to put that on there. So I've put the carb on, and I've put the intake pipe on top of it for the same reason as the beginning of this video. Wouldn't it be a shame for something to land in the carb after it's just freshly serviced and block a jet? But if the intake tube's on there, nothing can get in it. So while we do the reassembly, that intake tube is staying on there. A couple of years ago, I was sat in the sun making a new carburetor gasket of an evening, and I posted the photo of it on Instagram, and people lost their minds. Now, I didn't think it was actually worth making a video of at the time. I just thought it was this little piece, a little bit of bonus content for you all. But people went nuts. And I didn't realise that actually a lot of people don't know how to make their own gaskets. Now, there are some incredibly complex gaskets on a lot of more modern cars that have metal in them and all sorts, but for a lot of simple gaskets like this, you can simply buy a piece of gasket paper off the internet and draw around them with a sharp pencil and then just cut them out. It's really that simple. You can buy punches like this online, they're very easy to find, and make your own gaskets. And if you have a weird or obscure car, it's a fantastic skill that you can just learn to do yourself. It's super simple, it's like arts and crafts when you're a kid. What I would advise is not cutting with a pair of scissors though, using a Stanley knife and using punches for the holes. You'll get much better holes and be super accurate. I actually noticed on my Solex carburetor on my 2CV, the older style carburetors, that there's a slight overhang of the gasket where the float ball can actually get stuck, especially when you're driving over bumpy ground, causing the engine to overfuel and backfire. So I actually made a revised gasket that's better, and I kept the old one. I made a template, and I kept the old gasket safe, and I've still got it. And since then, I've actually made another gasket because I had to replace the little needle valve. But yeah, it's a super simple thing, and it takes 5 minutes, and it's much easier than ordering a brand new gasket online, and it's usually the exact same thing. Well, after a little bit of a faff and dropping the clip to the accelerator rod, it's all back together. And I found the clip, I promise, and it's all back on. But it runs better than it's ever done since my parents owned it. I don't think, having looked inside this carb, I don't think this carb has been rebuilt since 1974. But I'm really happy with it actually. She runs beautifully, she idles beautifully. Great stuff. So thank you all for watching. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them down in the comment section below. Please be awesome to each other, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye.